Kitab al Asif. A note from Tony Walker. In my latest story, I have Adam Cadmon, my hero, freaking out in the British Museum's secret reading room when he finds a copy of the Kitab al Asif, which was the original Arabic version of the Necronomicon, written by the mad Arab Abd al-Hazred. Transliterations vary. Briefly, al-Hazred was an Arabic scholar of the occult in early Islamic times. He was from Sana'a in Yemen, but travelled wildly in the Middle East in pursuit of his esoteric interests. He could have been born around 680 AD, at the same time became a worshipper of the mythos deities Cthulhu and Yog-Sothoth. Of course, not all of Yemen was Islamized, especially in al-Hazred's early life. Normally, Arabic names which begin Abdal, servant of, then have an Islamic qualifier, e.g. al-Din, the faith, or al-Rahman, the merciful. Because the version of the name in Lovecraft is clearly corrupt, there have been attempts to understand it. One is that Abd al-Hazra is a Persian and Ottoman Turkish word meaning presence, and as such a byword for the holy presence. I find this unconvincing. For one thing, there were no Ottoman Turks at the time of Abd al-Hazred's naming. There were Persians, but they were expelled from Yemen in around 630, so before Abd al-Hazred's birth. More likely is a suggestion that the name derives from the Arabic Hazara, fenced in, prohibited. As such, a servant of a god who is prohibited. If this is so, it is likely he got his name later when his worship of the dark gods became known. Initially, he's known as a poet in Sana'a in around 700 AD, but then there are documented travels to Memphis in Egypt, the ruins of Babylon, and the lost city of Irem in Arabia. It is below Irem he is said to have plumbed the depths and found the nameless city. There is no record of his travels to Jerusalem, and I find this strange because someone with his interest would surely be drawn by stories of Solomon and the Goetic demons. Al-Hazred settled in Damascus in around 730, aged around 50, during the reign of the Umayyad Caliphate. At that time, only around 10% of the population of Syria would have been Muslim, the rest being Christians or Jews. In Al-Hazred's home area, the proportion of Muslims would have been higher, though the tribes had originally been polytheistic or animists. My guess is Al-Hazred will never have been a Muslim. That would possibly have been tolerated by the Umayyads, though he may have had to be discreet. If he'd been a Muslim and become an apostate, he would have been executed. He allegedly disappeared under mysterious circumstances in 738. Other accounts have him devoured in front of witnesses by an invisible monster. During his time in Damascus, 730 to 38, he wrote the Kitab al Asif, where Asif means a keening or whistling noise, and has been attributed to the keening of the jinns in the desert. So, the Book of Howling? This has interesting parallels with the Goetic demons, whose name also seems to mean howling. The Kitab al Asif was translated into Greek, along with so many works from Arabic, around 950 in Byzantium by Theodorus Philetus, a scholar of the occult. It was given the title to Necronomicon, the Necronomicon, meaning the Book of the Law of the Dead. It was translated into Latin by Olaus Vormius, and both the Latin and Greek versions were prohibited by Pope Gregory IX in 1232. Inevitably, copies continued to circulate amongst esoteric circles, and there are reports of Greek and Latin editions throughout the Renaissance. It was translated by John Dee into English during his sojourn in Prague in 1587. It was never printed, and the handwritten manuscript has long since vanished. It is said that Johann von Goethe had sight of a German edition in 1805 in Weimar, Das Buch der schwarzen Geheimnisse, if indeed it was the Necronomicon and not another eldritch tome. He says he didn't read it, being repulsed by the first page. As for the original Arabic Kitab al Asif, all copies were said to have been destroyed on orders of the caliphs by the early 11th century. That cannot be so. There are rumors of a copy in San Francisco in the 20th century destroyed by fire. I have a report from a letter of a French officer who took part in Bonaparte's campaign in Egypt in 1798. In that year there was a revolt in Cairo, and he reports venturing into the southern district of Masr al-Kadima, where there was significant looting. This officer, a Captain Thomas Touquet, found a library that was defended by cultists. From it, he and others took a number of old Arabic manuscripts. He himself had no interest in them, and they were auctioned in Paris. These may be the old Egyptian manuscripts looted by Prussian forces in 1871 from the house of an elderly French nobleman in Reims. These documents came into the possession of a professor of Semitic philology at Freiburg, Alvin Oppermann, who spent many months researching his book Esoteric Texts of the Early Islamic Period, Oxford 1902, at the British Library in London. On his death in 1905, Oppermann's widow bequeathed many of his documents to the British Library, probably being disturbed by the reputation of some of them. This may be how an unknown copy of the Kitab al Asif came to be in the secret collection of the British Library in 1927.